D. James Kennedy Ministries presents Truths That Transform.
America has a First Amendment guaranteeing free speech. But what if the biggest threat to speech today is not government censorship?
If you take a socially unapproved stance on one of these issues, there's a good shot that YouTube will demonetize you or Facebook will crack down on you.
The danger of big tech censorship and what you can do about it on today's Truths That Transform. Welcome to Truths That Transform, a production of D. James Kennedy Ministries, where we are standing for truth and defending your freedom. For several years now, this ministry has been alerting you to the danger of censorship from the big Silicon Valley tech companies. That danger was realized as never before in the events surrounding the 2020 elections. On today's program, you will get an in-depth look at this problem. You will discover what drives this crackdown on free speech on the part of these tech giants, and we will give you an opportunity to help solve it. We begin with these companies attempting to put their thumb on the political scales, an attempt that was successful in 2020. Dr. Jerry Newcomb takes an inside look.
Did social media, that is Facebook, Twitter, and company, take it upon themselves to intervene in the 2020 election?
Instead of just only focusing on media, it's becoming clearer and clearer that we also need to pay attention to what social media is doing, what the tech giants are doing out there to expand that, because that's where so many people today, so many Americans, millions, even billions, get their news from.
Facebook has 2.7 billion users, which is the equivalent of the entire population of the two most populous countries in the world, China and India. Google, 92% of search around the world is controlled by Google.
Social media has become almost as important as the media, maybe more important as the media. They've hired young people by the thousands, right out of the universities. And most of these young people are completely advocating liberals. And they're in the game to suffocate conservatives, suffocate conservative voices, populism.
Perhaps these big tech giants were, in their minds, atoning for somehow having allowed Trump's unexpected win in 2016 in the first place.
There were videos out there that people produced that showed the Google bosses were very upset that they didn't do enough to stop President Trump. They almost had therapy sessions and crying sessions. So for the next 4 years, we've seen with the banning of Roger Stone, Laura Loomer, Milo Yiannopoulos, all sorts of conservatives' voices.
Critics argue that big tech was clearly biased for Biden's campaign and against Trump's. For example, millions of Americans never heard about the Hunter Biden laptop scandal reported by a mainstream newspaper.
The New York Post, founded by Alexander Hamilton in the 1800s. They've got the laptop of Hunter Biden, and in there was troves of information on his dealings from China and Ukraine and the millions they made.
Twitter suspended the New York Post account and started suspending anybody who posted this story. So in effect they censored it. And Twitter suspended the New York Post story for 17 days. And so that was all the time leading up to the election, to the point where more than a third of Democrat voters, more than a third of Biden voters had never heard of the story.
On top of that, Facebook directly influenced the election in Georgia through a generous political donation to the left.
You find out Facebook's giving $250 million through one of their not-for-profits to the Georgia Democratic Party for, canvassing and going out and drawing out the vote. So they played a major part in helping elect Joe Biden.
Then, after the election, with all the questions of irregularities, particularly in the swing states, Trump and his followers alleged voter fraud because of a plethora of incidents. But big tech flagged all these concerns as false allegations. And then came January 6, 2021, and the rushing of the Capitol.
In the aftermath, big tech companies scrambled to purge violent rhetoric. Twitter banned President Trump, cutting off his favorite link to supporters.
I think big tech has made a terrible mistake and very, very bad for our country.
After this incident, in the last days of the Trump administration, Twitter and Facebook took it upon themselves to censor the President of the United States, banning him from their platforms.
Think about this, the President of the US had 89 million followers, and Twitter just purged him, just knocked him off.
This whole story of the 2020 election and its aftermath is a part of the growing phenomenon of big tech yielding inordinate influence in our world.
When you talk about Silicon Valley, you are talking about an industry with hundreds of billions of dollars flowing through it on a constant basis to build new tech, to reach minds and change minds. And the conservatives are behind in the game.
Well, essentially, these big tech companies are holding themselves out as being the new virtual public square. They are now acting in many ways as kind of the ticket takers as to who can come in. If you got a liberal ticket, come on in. You got a conservative ticket? Not so sure. Let's see what you've got to say. That's not free speech, and when speech is no longer free, that's a problem for all of society, and people need to realize that.
Social media isn't the future of communications, it's the present of communications. There are a lot of older people who may not be using social media, but everybody who's under the age of 40 is, which is why we have this enormous audience, and it's disproportionately young. 70% of the people who listen to my conservative podcast, a very conservative podcast, are under the age of 35. So that's a big number of young people who are aware of our content.
I understand where that concern is coming from because Facebook and the tech industry are located in Silicon Valley, which is an extremely left-leaning place. I'm very committed to making sure that Facebook is a platform for all ideas.
One of the ways this left-wing censorship of Christian and conservative content works is through algorithms, basically programming the computers to make such decisions. One computer expert said that algorithms are opinions embedded in computer code.
An algorithm determines how a computer thinks. It's basically a lot of if statements. And it says, if this happens, then do that. And there's hundreds of these, if not thousands of if statements in a computer program.
One of these subtle or not so subtle ways in which this social media censorship is done is by clamping down on so-called hate speech. And who gets to define what hate speech is? Well, groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC.
So Google and Facebook and YouTube, a lot of the social media companies will uncritically look at reports from supposedly neutral arbiters like the SPLC or like Media Matters or like PolitiFact, and all of which lean left at the very least. And then they'll say, well, you know, if the SPLC says it's a hate group, that must mean it's a hate group. Like, well, who died and made the SPLC God? Like, how exactly did that work? How does the SPLC, which has promoted untruth on a variety of topics, suddenly become the great arbiter of what constitutes hateful speech? Everybody who disagrees with the hard left position, according to the SPLC, is borderline a hate group. There's no question that on YouTube the social issues are the hot button. Everything from race to abortion to same-sex marriage to transgenderism. If you violate the left's standards of political correctness here, then there's a good shot they're going to demonetize you. They'll find that you run afoul of their community standards. If you take a socially unapproved stance on one of these issues, there's a good shot that YouTube will demonetize you or Facebook will crack down on you.
It's really hard to create a startup and to compete with these huge giant tech companies that are already there. Yeah. So it's really hard for people to compete with that. Without these tech companies' help, it's really hard for them to grow, for people to realize that they exist. Yeah. So that's a problem too.
When a conservative alternative to Twitter arose, Parler, a tidal wave of conservatives migrated there, at which point the big tech giants ganged up on Parler to try and effectively kill it.
But what this really points to is the danger for all conservative organizations, all Christian organizations, all organizations that the woke left around the world doesn't like. Because what happened to Parler is they didn't just lose Amazon and Google and Apple. They lost their lawyers who were getting death threats. They lost all the businesses they worked with. They were effectively deplatformed across the board. What people have been saying for years, particularly conservatives have been saying this, oh, if you don't like that, the political stance of a company, go start your own. But that's no longer possible. What you have to do is you have to start your own company. You have to start your own server company, your own newsletter company, your own web services company, your own bank, your own credit card company, your own, and go down the line. It's everything from literally where you rent to how you deliver your services. They can take them all away. And that is the left's new strategy. So when we're talking about online, it's not about free speech. It's simply about freedom.
It was only a matter of time before these left-leaning tech giants played a decisive role in our political process. And they have been able to get away with it because they're playing a game. In order to avoid libel suits for things said on their sites, companies like Facebook and Twitter declare themselves to be platforms. And as such, they are shielded by Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. But when they censor and control information, they are acting as publishers who are not shielded by that act. If they're going to act as publishers who enforce a specific viewpoint and censor other viewpoints, then they need to be legally accountable for those decisions like any other publisher, rather than cloaking their discrimination behind federal law. That's why we want to call you to join us in calling upon Congress to revise Section 230. Please visit our website right away to sign the petition at djkm.org/230. Or you can call toll-free 877-962-7677. Tech giants like Facebook, Twitter, and Google can no longer be allowed to censor news organizations and even presidents to further their own ideological viewpoint, all while being shielded from the laws that apply to any other publisher. Hold big tech accountable by signing our petition to congressional leaders to revise Section 230. Again, sign it at djkm.org/230, or you can call toll-free 877-962-7677. This battle is occurring because of a clash of worldviews. Those running the tech giant companies and much of corporate America now are diametrically opposed to the founding principles of our nation. Dr. D. James Kennedy sheds more light on the culture war in America.
We have in America today going on what may be called culture wars. But one thing that you never hear from the media is who started the war, right? Who did? Well, it's interesting that because of the blatant censorship that has gone on in our schools, colleges for over a generation, we have a vast multitude of people who know nothing about the real founding of this country. They don't realize that what has happened is that this country, which for 300 years was a Christian nation since the Pilgrims landed here, and in the last 50 years an increasing assault by atheists and agnostics and secularists and humanists of every communist, every stripe imaginable, They have had this unceasing barrage of attack against all of the Christian institutions of this country and have been enormously successful in taking over the entire public education system, taking over most of the media. In 1850, almost every newspaper in this country was operated, run, published by Christians. When did you last pick up a Christian newspaper? And we are simply saying it's time for Christians to defend the spiritual liberty and values that made this nation great. We didn't start the war. We didn't start it, but by the power of God's Holy Spirit, by the power of His gospel, by Christian men and women being committed to share the power of that gospel, which is the only power that can transform lives, we, by His grace, are going to end it. There are many people who are still enjoying many aspects of American life. But I remember the words of Dr. Francis Schaeffer, who gave one of the very last sermons that he ever preached shortly before he died, right from this pulpit. And he said that the problem in America is that even Christians are seeking only peace and prosperity, while they watch the whole culture slide into hell around them and do nothing about it. But if we continue the way that we're going, and if Christians do not begin to do something to change it, we are going to see both peace and prosperity utterly demolished in this nation. And we, who have sat by, as Dr. Schaeffer said, wanting only our own personal peace and prosperity, and have allowed these things to take place, we are going to be held responsible by God. What can we do? Very quickly, two things. I've said them 1,000 times. I'll say them again, because they're the two things that God tells us to do. There is the Great Commission, first of all, that we need to proclaim the gospel of Christ to every creature. Do you know what the problem is? The problem is very simple. What is the problem with all of these people? With all of the ungodly people, the people that hate Christ and hate Christians and hate His Word? They have never been converted. That's their problem. We have, because of our own neglect and our own failure to obey the Great Commission, we've allowed an ever-growing number of heathen to spring up in this country, until they're virtually surrounding the church. The time has come now, while there is still a place to stand, to take a stand. What the ungodly and the immoral want from us is simply nothing more or less than our silence. And we have been all too willing to acquiesce and grant them that silence. We need to prepare ourselves to speak. We need to proclaim, first of all, the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is because of the disobedience of Christians in churches all across this land, their disobedience to the Great Commission, who told every person that names the name of Christ to go and proclaim the gospel to every creature. And the vast majority of Christians in this nation have been totally disobedient to that commission. I would ask you, how many people have you personally led to Jesus Christ? It should be many. But those people that you haven't led to Jesus Christ are the people that are teaching your children all sorts of immoral and ungodly things. They're the people that should have been won to Christ in the last decade, in the last 50 years, in the last century, that haven't been won to Christ, who have been multiplying and taking over the institutions of this country, and now are banging on the doors of the church itself. We are told to go out on the offensive and proclaim the gospel of Christ. How long will we continue in this disobedience, refusing to do the central thing that Christ told us to do, to proclaim the gospel to a lost, immoral, increasingly anti-Christian, anti-God world? Dear friends, as we go from this conference, may we go with a new determination that we are going to serve Christ, we are going to make him known, and we are going to become a part in some way of this society in which we live, to do something to change it back, to reclaim America for Christ. Will you do that? Do something toward that end that you haven't done before. Unless we have people who have that commitment, there is no hope for this country.
As you just heard from Dr. Kennedy, the secular left wants our silence. It's a key in advancing their agenda, and that's why we must not be silent. Giant tech companies like Facebook, Google, and Twitter are driven by ideology, and they are working to silence the views of Christians and conservatives. And they hide behind laws that protect them from responsibility for flagrant viewpoint discrimination and outright censorship. We are calling upon leaders in Congress to change Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act to hold these companies accountable. These media giants should not be above the law. Please join us in making that appeal. Sign our petition to congressional leaders calling for a revision of Section 230 by going online to djkm.org/230 or call toll-free 877-962-7677. Please sign our petition today to keep the power of these runaway giants in check. And we also have some key resources to share with you to help you further understand and engage on this issue. The first is our ministry-exclusive book, The New Gatekeepers: Censoring Christians in the Digital Age. This book explains what's at stake and gives you specific steps to take to protect your freedoms. Big tech autocrats will determine whether your children and grandchildren have access to the truth, or if they will only be exposed to the version of events that Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, and the leftist media want them to have. The New Gatekeepers gives you a handy guidebook to the issues at stake and a plan for what to do about it. Simply write to us at D. James Kennedy Ministries, Box 11154, Fort Lauderdale, Florida 33339, or call toll-free 877-962-7677, or go online to djkm.org. And if you are able to give a generous donation of $40 or more, we will send you the book plus our expanded, updated DVD special report, Censoring the Truth: Facebook, Google, and the New Media Gatekeepers. This is one of the major issues Christians will face in the 21st century, and we are already seeing the power of these tech companies to suppress, censor, and even ban the free speech of law-abiding Americans. Become equipped to fight back for your sake and the sake of your freedom and your children's freedom, and for the freedom of your country. Simply write to us at D. James Kennedy Ministries, Box 11154, Fort Lauderdale, Florida 33339, or call toll-free 877-962-7677, or you can go online to djkm.org. And whatever you do, make sure to call or go online to djkm.org/230 to sign the petition to to change Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act to hold these companies accountable. Censorship in digital media goes far beyond liberal versus conservative or even left versus right. It goes far deeper than simply one group of gatekeepers imposing their ideology onto hundreds of millions of Americans. At a more fundamental level, this is the outworking of cultural Marxism. It's not merely an overheated reaction to the events of the day, like, say, the Capitol Hill riot in January. Instead, it's the implementation of a plan begun decades ago by those who wanted to bring Marxist totalitarianism to the West. If you don't know the name Herbert Marcuse, you would do well to become acquainted with him. Marcuse was one of the German philosophers of the Frankfurt School who emigrated to Columbia University here in America during the rise of the Third Reich. They rechanneled Marxism into what became known as critical theory, which lives on today as critical race theory and gender theory, and so on. It seeks to destroy capitalism by overthrowing cultural norms in the revolutionary pursuit of a supposedly more just society. Among the cultural norms Marcuse was dedicated to overthrowing was free speech, an American value enshrined in our First Amendment. Marcuse said that people who are considered among the powerful, which in critical race theory is thought to be especially white, straight males, need to have their free speech severely curtailed. He called tolerating all viewpoints repressive tolerance, and instead called for liberating tolerance. In his words, liberating tolerance then would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left. In other words, ideological censorship. How do Twitter and Facebook get away with banning the President of the United States? How is it possible that Amazon and Apple could act together to destroy alternative social media platforms? When you understand the history, it's no surprise at all. Just look to Herbert Marcuse's call for the kind of heavy-handed censorship now being imposed on our nation by cultural elites steeped in Marxist critical theory. D. James Kennedy Ministries is standing for truth and defending your freedom. I'm Frank Wright. Thank you for being with us. And here's a look at the next truths that transform.
We have a job to do. It's a twofold job. We destroy arguments and speculations raised against the knowledge of God, and we take every thought captive to obey Christ.
That's next week. Today's program is available on DVD for your gift to this ministry of any amount. Please call, write, or log on to our website today. This has been a production of D. James Kennedy Ministries.